Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. In today's culture of polarization and constant change, how do we find the confidence to navigate life's challenges? Now, confidence is a trait that many of us strive for, but it can be especially difficult to maintain in the face of difficulty or confusion. Today's guest explores how the eight worldly winds in Buddhism offer a profound insight into the forces that shape our self-perception and emotional well-being. Our guest is Ethan Nichtern, author of the new book, Confidence, Holding Your Seat Through Life's Eight Worldly Winds. A renowned contemporary Buddhist teacher and host of the Road Home podcast, which I highly recommend. I love it. Ethan has offered meditation and Buddhist psychology classes at conferences, meditation centers, yoga studios, and universities, including Brown, Yale, and NYU. He lives in Brooklyn. Well, hello, Ethan, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's great to be here.
Now, in your book, you point out most of us struggle intensely with genuine confidence. And it's a book about confidence. So why don't we start out? And then you also say, in recent years, the baseline anxiety of almost everyone I know has risen like the planet's sea levels. Generalized anxiety now reigns supreme. Oh my goodness, I can testify to that. Okay, so what's going on here? And what is genuine confidence versus false confidence, which you also talk about?
Yeah, thank you. So this book comes out of, my own study and practice of Buddhist teachings as well as Western psychology, and I work with a lot of people. And, I really found in my own path, and whenever I would dig one step below the surface level of interest in mindfulness or meditation or Buddhist concepts, what would come up in conversations with people and in my own experience is really this struggle with confidence. So if you look up confidence in most dictionaries, you see something that has to do with trusting or having faith. And
Right.
I think of confidence meaning trusting your own ability to navigate life, especially when life gets uncertain or difficult, when you're in a situation where you have to put yourself out there in some way, usually, right? So
Right.
trusting, I don't know how this is going to go, but I know that I have the tools and the ability to figure it out. Maybe not, as the kids say, kill it, but I can be here. I can, as we say in the book, hold my seat with whatever's coming up. And it's something I've struggled with, and I think also, we live in this era where there's a lot of false confidence. I think especially false male confidence. I'm reminded the other definition of confidence is that the word con man is short for confidence man, right? So
Right.
that interplay between sort of a genuine, compassionate, connected, attainable, like practice of confidence versus this bloated arrogance, like I'm the king of the world, not thinking of anybody in particular, but I think we all summer of 2024 have someone who comes to mind for that bloated, arrogant form of confidence.
Well, yes. I mean, malignant narcissism is a form of confidence, I suppose, a form of negative confidence. From the Latin, confideo, fideo means to believe or to have faith, and con means within. So confidence is having faith in yourself, which is one of the things about Buddhism that always attracted me, um, particularly that sermon to the Kalama tribe, where they're saying, hey, we don't know what to believe. Every other week, another teacher comes and contradicts the last one. And he says, hey, don't put your faith in teachers or traditions or scriptures or even what I'm telling you, unless it rings true for you in here. Now, I think that's genuine confidence if you actually have a sense of what makes sense to you, rather than this act or this performance of shallow confidence that you talk about, or the false confidence, or the narcissism, etc. But you also point out that we have to take privilege into account when we're talking about confidence. And so, what do I do with that? I'm a white male. I mean, what can I do with about that?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question. I was in one of the conversations I had for this book. I talked to Dan Harris, who's the author of 10% Happier and 10% Happier podcast, and he talked about his wife was writing a book about imposter syndrome, and they were out at dinner with a bunch of friends, and she shared that she was writing this book, and the women at the table were all like, "Oh, I need to read that book," and he said the men at the table were like, "What's imposter syndrome?"
Uh-huh.
And my response to that was, I think the dudes were kind of lying, So in a sense, these principles, Buddhist principles, they're completely universal. They apply to anybody with a body, a heart, a mind, any human being. And I think, a lot of the principles apply throughout time and space, regardless of culture or class or gender or race or any of these things. But we also, in the Buddhist teachings, talk about interdependent or complex causes and conditions, right? So being here, wherever here is the result of a lot of supportive conditions that have come about in the past, and having gratitude for one's supportive conditions, I think from a Buddhist standpoint, that's like in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they talk a lot about contemplating your precious human birth, right? Which is this idea that you're born in a human body, you have good faculties, you have the ability to deeply contemplate the nature of your experience. And these are privileges, So I think in modern parlance or contemporary parlance, saying, oh, okay, I have a social location. Like actually, maybe as a white male, I was taught implicitly, like, it's okay to not know what I'm doing and just give it a shot. I show up on a podcast. I mean, it's a joke about men and podcasts. If you go on social media, there's lots of jokes about men and their podcasts.
Oh, I haven't heard
But
of.
just like, well, I mean, podcasts are very free form, flowing, medium. So you just get to sort of say something and see what sticks. And I do think as men, a lot of times we're kind of trained, oh, just try something out, right? Which is a huge part of confidence is actually, as I said, being willing to try and formulate life as a practice and not knowing how it's going to go and then make another attempt. And so I think, privilege is just a piece of the supportive conditions of understanding these universal principles and saying, if I have supportive conditions, to be able to try and show up and do hard things. And if it doesn't go so well, I'll be given the opportunity to try again. Just acknowledging that is a good thing. And then also, I think, in our interconnection, being able to say, I want that for others. I want that for people who don't have the privileges that I have. How can I support them?
I love one of the things you point out in the book where about the egalitarian nature of Buddhism's core belief in human capability, that we all have the capacity to show up to life. This confidence is available to every human. So it makes me, and I think that's true, and I really love that about this way of looking at things. But how much does gender make a difference? Because if you think biologically, I mean, I'm a male. I have a lot of testosterone. I'm inclined to be assertive or, to be outgoing, and maybe more so than my feminine friends. Is that like, I know traditionally in Buddhism, it was considered to be, advantageous to have a male incarnation. In fact, in the beginning, I mean, I don't think women were even allowed to become nuns until a while. Took a little while. Um, but anyway, you know, what does it mean to have confidence? I mean, if everybody has an equal capacity for confidence, it doesn't have to be based on testosterone or any one particular way of approaching things.
No, no, no. And Buddhism, if you study the history of Buddhism, which is a very long and very diverse history, but for the majority of it, it does suffer from the same, patriarchal biases that a lot of other, it's part of the same world system. And also, I'd say, that assertive style of confidence, yes, sometimes assertiveness is what's called for. Sometimes you do have to assert yourself. Sometimes confidence means showing up and actually listening well or being more receptive. I mean, I think the confidence that it takes to meditate is actually much more receptive, and has more of a being with what is quality than a doing or accomplishing. So I think different situations call for different approaches.
Right.
But really, the idea of confidence here is just the ability to navigate whatever a situation throws at us,
And you point out that characteristics of situations that arise for us are described by what the Buddhists refer to as the eight worldly winds. So let's get into that. There's these four pairs of forces that your book examines, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So some of the things in the book Confidence, as I often try to write, come from, a synthesis of kind of, modern Western thought and Buddhist thought, or, my own kind of, interpretations. But the eight worldly winds is a list that comes from, 2,600 years ago, the historical Buddha. And I've always loved it because it's these four pairs, as you say, that sort of describe the experiences that every human faces, the forces that being a human in the world throws at us. And, they're mentioned throughout by Buddhist teachers, modern and ancient, but they're so relevant to me, and they're never given or rarely given like a lot of sort of room to feel through and think through our relationship to. So each pair is centered around the experience of what you might call hope and fear, right? So, in other words, in each pair, there's an experience that naturally as humans we hope for, and there's an experience that we fear or brace against. The most visceral of these is the experience of pleasure and pain, right? Every human being hopes to feel good and fears feeling pain, etc. Then it gets into sort of our more psychological experiences. We hope for praise, right? When somebody, reads your book or listens to your radio show and then sends you an email, you're hoping for praise, you're fearing criticism, and we could pretend we're not, but what's being said is these are just human experiences. These are just the winds of the world.
Right.
And then when we put ourselves out there, we're hoping maybe to have some recognition or some even fame. I talk about this playing off the notion of influencer as hoping for influence and
Right.
fearing insignificance. You don't matter. Nobody clicked on your link. Nobody read your book. Nobody showed up for your birthday party. And then the last one, which is the most generalized, is the experience of success, or sometimes it's called gain. And the fear is that we fail, and or lose, right? And so, I love these, and I love looking at these with the metaphor. They're called different things in classic Buddhism. Sometimes one of my teachers, Sharon Salzberg, just translates them as the vicissitudes, which feels like a very kind of like college prep English major word.
Right.
But I really loved in preparing for this book the metaphor of wind, right? The wind is striking us. And the image that I got stuck in my mind, which a lot of people so far have like sent me pictures when they pass one of these, is when you're at a car wash or a car dealership.
Right.
Outside the dealership, there's those tube people that, when the
Yeah.
wind
Right. Right.
animates them, they just wave and they look so happy and joyous. And then the wind goes away and they just crumple over in despair. And so that there's this notion that we are constantly being struck day by day, moment by moment by, hope and fear. And we're trying to actually settle with and say, I don't know which of these is going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to succeed or fail. I don't know if you're going to praise me or criticize me. I don't know if it's going to be pleasant or unpleasant, but I'm trying to navigate actually moving through the world and having a place, which in meditation is called taking our seat, having a place in the world with the wind constantly striking me, you
So
know?
you bring up equanimity in the book as some kind of resting place or antidote to being buffeted by these eight worldly winds. And I also found it interesting that it's possible to be thrown off balance by the hope side as well as by the other side.
Yeah, yeah. So the hope side does actually both sides throw us off balance, right? So classically, if you study the earliest Buddhist teachings, these four pairs are kind of taught or presented in relationship to this quality of mind, this quality of a more awakened approach to our experience, that's most frequently translated as equanimity. In the classic language, it's upekkha or upeksha. And this is one of the most confusing translations in sort of like modern Western Buddhist thought, because it's like, well, that doesn't feel, like the idea of, okay, is somebody going to praise my work or criticize me? Like that doesn't feel like equanimous. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of emotional information when we're waiting for feedback, when we're waiting to see how we're doing. There's a lot of feelings inside. It's very windy, actually, right? So, I think actually the notion of holding our seat, which is just the ability to reside or stay present with whatever we're experiencing in the range of hope and fear, is a better definition. I think in some ways, confidence is really what we're talking about, So
We're so overwhelmed with stimulation, with all of these stimulating inputs encouraging us to go for it or to achieve something or to, get what we want. We've got to manifest. It's like there's so much pressure. There's so much ego pressure to make something happen or to, you know, realize the hope side of this spectrum. And it seems like then you look at Buddhists and then kind of the image of Buddhists is are they just so even tempered that they're not affected by anything? It's like, do they ever get excited about anything, or is that a bad thing? There's that book Dopamine Nation, which basically
yeah.
spells out how addicted we all are, as a society. So are good Buddhists supposed to not be affected by circumstances?
No, I mean, and that's why when I write, my writing always has a little bit of a memoir quality to it, because I always try to include personal experiences. And specifically, when talking about the eight worldly winds, I really like to include little anecdotes or stories about being strongly affected by my experience, right? That
Right.
there is some notion of like detachment, which is at odds with, some of the themes from contemporary Western psychology, like attachment theory. And I think the idea is that as we become more mindful, it's not that we're not affected. It's more has a quality of like, I've been around the block and I know what the mind does, And so that's the thing about experiencing hope is let's say you're seeking success with some project in your life. There's a quality as you develop of actually knowing, okay, well, if I get this thing done and it's successful, I am probably going to feel good. That's probably the likely outcome because that's what I'm hoping for. And that's going to feel good to feel good. That animating wind of the tube man cheering, outside the car wash, like it's going to feel joyous. But then if I've been around the block, I know it's not going to permanently solve my problems. I mean, ask any successful person you've ever met, ask a friend who's gotten the success that you want to get, right? If you're looking for a relationship, ask the friend who's in a long-term relationship. If you're looking to get a book published, ask the friend who's gotten a book published, et cetera, et cetera. And what they tell you is, yeah, it's good. I'm not going to say it's not good, and I wish that for you if that's what you're hoping for, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of being human. And with hope, I think the particular thing is there's a mirage with hope, which is that we think this is going to permanently solve my problems and I won't have to show up as a person after this, or we're going to be disappointed and then we'll be crushed in despair, right? So that's the thing about getting what we want is it doesn't actually, so it's a good thing to get what you want, especially if it's a benefit to both yourself and others, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem,
Yeah, in
and
fact,
in
yeah, it can cause suffering. To the extent that you become addicted to it or that you need more or it's never enough, there's no satisfaction. Like Mick Jagger said, it's like there's no satisfaction in getting what
yeah,
you want. I always used to say, I used to teach Vipassana, and I would say, according to my point of view, which is informed by Buddhism, even getting what you want is not going to make you happy. It's these wins. It's one of these wins. It's the pleasure wind or the success wind or whatever it is. It's
yeah.
just blowing through. Hey, I got to ask you about something because you talk about something, and I've never really been clear about this. This is one of the aspects of Buddhism that just I have always found confounding, and that is the concept of emotions
Mm.
and this idea of noticing feelings and giving them a label: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And I'm wondering, I can't, I mean, I'm going to confess, I'm going to be vulnerable here. I'm going to confess, I never understood the value or purpose of that practice.
Mm.
Vedana, you call it, mindfulness of feeling tone. Okay, so can you kind of unpack that?
Sure, sure. And this is related to the chapter on pleasure and pain, which I
Yeah.
think sets the tone for our relationship to hope and fear with everything else in the more psychological realm. So there's a meditation, very simple meditation, mindfulness meditation in Buddhism, where we are asked to track and just very gently and non-judgmentally label whether we find the arising moment pleasant, whether we find it unpleasant, you could also say painful, or whether we find it having a neutral quality, right? And that's, in a sense, you could say that what the Buddha thought was these moments of reaction are kind of like, if you had computer code, you have zeros and ones. These are almost the zeros and ones of our reactivity as human beings and as sentient beings. A moment arises, and we either kind of intuitively feel like give me more of that or we intuitively say no, 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 no,
Right.
or we say meh, you know. And so what any kind of mindfulness and labeling sort of exercise or practice, and this is also done in Western psychological traditions, is it gives you a little bit, it gives the mind a little bit of a remove from the experience so that you just see the pattern. You just start to see zeros and ones. And when you do that meditation where it's like, oh, okay, that breeze feels nice on a summer day, pleasant, you know. Oh, my back itches, painful, you know. Oh, this is kind of boring. I've been sitting here for 5 minutes, neutral or painful, you know, unpleasant, whatever it is. You just start to see how the mind really does seesaw back and forth between pleasure and pain, and also how we do tend to brace against temporary unpleasant experiences pretty strongly. So there's various insights, but the idea is to actually just start to behold the mind making its first layer of reaction to its experience so that we're a little bit more settled and attentive and a little less likely to chase the experience.
Amazing. Well, thank you for breaking that down. We're rapidly running out of time here, and we've got about a minute left. And I just want to give you a chance to express what you might want to share with our Pathways audience before we close.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And in terms of this conversation on confidence in the second half of the book, I go more into practices for working with confidence. What I really, if there's one thing I really want to say about writing this book, it's the idea that confidence is not an end point. It's not like a state that you attain and then you got it. It's a practice, and it's an ongoing practice of showing up, being afraid to show up, and it's a practice that never ends. And the more that I've actually viewed it that way, I think the more I've actually been able to use my practice to do difficult things and be present in more difficult situations in my life in the world. And so that's all I want to say. Confidence is a practice, not an endpoint.
I love it. I love it. And I love the way that you seize on the term resilience as a possible alternative to equanimity as the anecdotal concept. Well, thank you, Ethan. There's so much more we could explore. Your book is awesome, but we have run out of time. And I want to make sure to tell our listeners about your website, which is ethannichtern.com. Ethan, I'm going to spell your name. It's all one word, ETHANNICHTERN.com. And I want to encourage people to go there. Like I said, I started listening to your podcast and I love it. I think you're fantastic. You've got a great personality for podcasting, and it was very entertaining and so edifying. And you have these interesting guests. So I hope people go to ethannichtern.com, buy your book, which is fantastic also, and see what else you do, because you're playing an important role these days, and I really appreciate you, and thank you for being on the show. And I want to make sure to tell those who might have turned in late today that this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of the book Intuitive Intelligence, which shares the theme of pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. Now, don't worry, you can play and or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Ethan Nichtern, author of the book Confidence, Holding Your Seat Through Life's 8 Worldly Winds. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboofm every Sunday morning at 8:30 USA Pacific Time. Even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's spelled D-I-V-I nation.com, as well as via iTunes, Paulo's YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. Well, this is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Ethan Nichtern and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.